All right, we are back. Mike Morgan, JC Sherbert here on JC and Morgan. We'll get back to some of the stories of the day in college football in our final segment. But as we've discussed during the offseason, we're pretty guest heavy, and we've had the great fortune of having so many distinguished voices, whether it's announcers or people that just cover the great sport of football. And this one ranks at the very top. He's on the Mount Rushmore, no matter how you want to define it. Verne Lundquist, we don't have enough time to get into your entire biography, sir, because there's just so much there. I mean, it almost snuck up on me. I did tell the story that you and I met when you were inducted into the NSMA Broadcasting Hall of Fame back in 2007. I was a statewide winner, and I remember sitting down at a table one-on-one and just getting to talk with you, and you were so great in your words, and have been managed to stay in touch a little bit since. So let me first start off by saying thank you for that back when I was younger and very inspired by your words. Thank you for all that you've done, and so much thanks goes to you for taking out the time today. Appreciate it.
Mike, we were both younger back then.
True.
Considerably. Yes, I do remember that conversation. And that was a great honor. I guess the organization has now moved from Catawba College to Wake Forest. Is that correct?
Yeah. We used to go when the winners would stay at a Holiday Inn in Salisbury, North Carolina.
Right.
I remember it very well. You had your Chili's and your Applebee's, and those were your eating options. But we'd play golf. It was 3 days, 2 nights, and we'd all get to collaborate and hang out with people like yourself and Jim Nantz and Joe Buck, the national winners. And it was the ultimate honor, and it was so well done by the people that organized that. But yes, they have moved it ever since. Let me just do this. Indulge me, if you will. And I'm not going to do this justice because these are just some of your infamous calls. Okay. I've mentioned my introduction to football in any form, and I wish college football had an NFL Films, but it was NFL Films. Like as a kid, I knew I wanted to get into broadcasting and sportscasting in particular. And I'd come home from school, and rather than Scooby-Doo and the Flintstones, I would watch. ESPN didn't have a lot of programming at that time. They had NFL Films. And I remember, as someone who also enjoyed watching the Cowboys in my youth, but this game happened before I was old enough to understand it, but they played the Super Bowl 13 call. You were the voice of the Dallas Cowboys, for those that don't know. They had a tight end, a very good tight end by the name of Jackie Smith. And in a key moment against the Steelers and a perfectly thrown ball by Staubach in the end zone, Jackie just flat out dropped it. And you said, and they played this on the show, bless his heart, he's got to be the sickest man in America. I thought to myself, that has got to be the best way to describe that call, and one of the best calls I've still ever heard today. That was in 1979. Do you remember that call very well?
Oh, kind of. Yes, I do. And there's a background to why I said what I said. There are many iterations of that play, but let's go back to the reason I was so empathetic in that case. We had just developed the ability to go live remotely back then in '79. It was an innovative thing, and so I was working. In addition to doing the Cowboys, I was the sports anchor at the ABC affiliate in Dallas, WFAA TV, and we went live from Fort Lauderdale, the Galt Ocean Mile Hotel, I think it was. Anyway. And I had Jackie Smith and his wife as my guest on the telecast at 10, I don't know, or on a Wednesday night at 10:25. And he had come to the Cowboys his first year, Hall of Famer with the St. Louis Cardinals. This was his last season, and he had announced that. And I asked Jackie on that telecast, how would you like to be remembered? And he said, with a meaningful catch in a Cowboy victory.
Oh.
So that was going through my mind. And the other part of that play that is intriguing is that they had practiced it all week long from the 5-yard line in. In this case, the ball was at the 11-yard line. So when Landry sent the play in, Roger Staubach looked at Tom and said, "No, no." And Landry just glared at him and pointed a finger and said, "Run the play." So Roger will tell you that in trying to guide the ball, because Jackie was so wide open, he took a little bit off. And instead of drilling it, he kind of squeezed it in there. And the timing was just a fraction disrupted. That's what we had. And it gets replayed all the time. And
all the time.
Yeah, it does.
Because you nailed the emotion of the moment. And that, when I think of what makes you the Hall of Famer that you are, it's the economy of words, and it is the nailing of the emotion of the moment. Whether it was SEC football, which we'll get to, the Masters for 40 years, voice of the Dallas Cowboys, that was all in that one call to me. Just, I know you weren't thinking that heavily about it because as a play-by-play guy, we just have to. Everything is spontaneous.
Sure.
But you had to feel good about the call, even though the moment, because if you're the voice of a team like you were, you're feeling some of that pain. And obviously you knew Jackie, as you mentioned. I just thought that nailed it. Let me mention a few more. And again, I'm not going to do this justice. April 13th, 1986. We have a lot of golf fans. I mean, people that love football also seem to love golf. This is the 50th Masters, 1986. Nicklaus makes the birdie putt on 17th. On the 17th of the outright lead, the call, 3 words. Maybe? Yes, sir. Right? 1992. I remember where I was watching this when you called Leitner hitting the shot against Duke. There's the pass to Leitner. Puts it up. Yes! Used to play that call on my talk shows back in the day. April 10th, 2005, Tiger Woods sinks a dramatic chip-in birdie on the 16th hole. Here it comes. Oh, my goodness. Oh, wow. In your life, have you seen anything like that? November 10th, 2012. This is Alabama, Texas A&M. A young man by the name of Johnny Manziel throws a touchdown pass after nearly getting sacked and fumbling the football. The call, snap from Patrick Lewis, 4-man Alabama rush. Got him? No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious. How about that? Few more. Just bear with me here. Then in 2013, this is Georgia-Auburn, top 25 matchup, CBS, game of the week, 3:30. Again, many of us remember where we were when we were watching the play. The Hail Mary pass. The call from Verne. 4th and 18. Lets it go. Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh. Oh, no. Ricardo Lewis. Talk about a Hail Mary. And then the kick 6, which has to be, if you think of the top 10 plays in the history of the sport, this one is going to be up there for sure. November 30th. You folks know it. 2013. Iron Bowl. As the field goal is lined up, the call from Verne. On the way, no. Returned by Chris Davis. Davis goes left. Davis gets a block. Davis has another block. Chris Davis, no flags. Touchdown Auburn, an answered prayer. Again, I'm not doing that justice, but I had to read it with a little inflection just to kind of give the people an idea of how big those moments were, and you were on all of them, and I could name 100 more, but is there anything there, the ones I just went over, that stands out?
Yes, he probably replied.
Wow.
I don't even know if it's fair to ask you to pick a couple because they're all so iconic.
You know, Mike, if you practice this craft, you go to an event and you hope something memorable breaks out in front of you. And then you pray that you're capable of verbally accenting that moment. And in my case, I've been blessed that so many times something memorable has broken out. And more times than not, I've been up to the task of underlining the moment. And I think that the key, in my view, is an economy of words. Be succinct. I learned that from a golf broadcaster when I first started at Augusta in 1983. Our executive producer was Frank Chirkinian. We called him the Ayatollah, partly out of respect, but mostly out of fear. And I will add parenthetically, he was the single most profane human being I've ever known in my life. but he taught me a lot. And one thing was, there were various lessons. But the key was keep it simple and get out of the way, and use an economy of words. Don't catch verbal diarrhea. Just shut up. I mean, memorably, the first occasion I ever worked with Frank was a golf tournament in 1983, the Phoenix Open, and that was I had done some golf when I was at ABC. I was at ABC 74 to 82 with while doing the Cowboys and then the weekend. The Monday through Friday sports anchoring. But I got an opportunity to go to CBS. I got an opportunity because I got those dreaded words from Chuck Howard at ABC. We're moving in a different direction. We ain't renewing your contract. And that was in 1982. It's a long, complicated story, but I got a shot to go to CBS. And part of it was golf. And Frank taught me, be succinct. We've got 65 of the best technical and production people in the world who are working this event. They'll document visually and orally. You punctuate and keep it as simple as you can. And I sometimes listen to guys now who they think the world was created for them to go at a run-on sentence. And too many of them just lay out. Let the movement breathe. And it's good advice. I think even I'm 83. I get a number of calls from young men in their late 20s, early 30s. What advice would you give? Find a variety of adjectives, keep it simple, and get out of the way. And I'm smiling to myself because I remember that kick six call when I did say no flags. There was that fraction of a moment after he scored when I looked back and I thought, dear God, don't let there be any flags.
Yeah.
So true. So true. Thankfully, there was not.
Yeah.
Even today, when I rewatch that, I kind of think, really? And I glanced down at the field to kind of confirm because it was just a split second there. So I definitely get that. Verne, they've got a sequel coming out to Happy Gilmore. And I know you were the star of that classic comedy. Describe that experience working with Sandler and all those guys. That's a movie that's near and dear to my heart. And your thoughts on the sequel and sort of, was that fun for a guy like you, kind of being in the movie set? I mean, did you meet Bob Barker? I mean, is there? I just that experience intrigues me as someone that's in sports and also loves movies and has done a little amateur acting. That I figured I'd ask you about that.
Sure, JC. We shot that movie in 1996, and I got a call from my agent, a guy named Bob Rosen, I've had since the early 80s, and he said, "There's a part, a small part, in a film that they're shooting in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I've recommended you for the part. So get on a plane tomorrow or next week." And then fly to Vancouver. And we shot everything in which I was involved in one day, one full day. and Adam Sandler was still there. I got to see him shoot one scene, and the intriguing thing to me about it is that when we met that morning at 7:00, there was a circle around. Dennis Dugan was the director. He also was an actor, and he played the PGA commissioner in the movie. And so Dennis said, "I've got an idea. Let's have an inside joke. Let's do something just for us." And he looked at this really handsome guy standing on the periphery of the circle. His name was Jack Jaraputo. And he said, "Jack, go over to makeup and costume and have them give you a coat and tie. And I want you to sit next to Verne in every scene, but you cannot say a word because you're not a member of the Screen Actors Guild." So the guy sitting to my left is Jack Jaraputo, and he just nods. And he's a screen stealer because he's such a handsome guy. Well, it turned out he was Adam Sandler's roommate at New York University's film school. And he was there just to, lend his roommate some support. Well, now if you watch Adam Sandler's latest films, Jack Jaraputo is the executive producer on all of them. So he used that little on-camera time very well.
And no doubt.
Yeah.
that's something we didn't know.
Gilmore too, and I'm just distressed because I haven't gotten a call.
Oh,
I guess they've moved on with their lives.
do you still have your SAG card? Is that what's holding up this?
I do. I still pay my dues.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll see if we can make a few phone calls and make that happen.
I'd like that.
That would be an injustice.
That darn movie, it caught on, and USA Cable or one of the cable outfits replays it, and it's the wonderful thing for me is that it's connected. It's given me a connection across two generations, and I'll give you one quick anecdote about that. Billy Packer and I were doing a North Carolina at Arizona game in Tucson, and it was a made-for-television event. And North Carolina had a really good team, and Lute Olson was the head coach. Roy Williams was the coach at North Carolina, and Lute Olson at Arizona. And so we were sitting halfway up in the stands because Roy Williams didn't want any of us down close because he used profane language quite liberally, and we didn't want. So we were halfway up in the stand, and when they were doing stretching exercises after practice had ended, and this tall, lanky red shirt came galloping up the steps and leaned into 6 or 7 of us who were sitting there, and he said, "Mr. Lundquist, the team would like you to talk to him now." And I said, "You mean Billy Packer?" "No, they want you." And I said, "Holy cow." So I followed him back down, and the 12 guys were all on the floor stretching, post-practice stretching exercise. And Tyler Hansborough was right below me, their All-American center. And I said, "Fellas, what can I do for you?" And he looked up at me and said, "Give us the line from Happy Gilmore." So I just cupped my hand. I said, "Who the hell is Happy Gilmore?" And they laughed. By the way, that one scene, I don't know why it resonated, but it did. And my wife Nancy and I were invited to the world premiere. That's where I met Bob Barker. I didn't meet him at the set in Vancouver, but it was a big deal. I mean, they had a red carpet and all that kind of stuff. But it's kept me in touch with 2 generations now, because these kids could be my grandchildren who are playing, and I get it a lot. Who the hell is Happy Gilmore? Not so parenthetically, after the issues of the golf tournament, the PGA Championship last week, a screensaver appeared, and it's me with Jack Jaraputo. My hand is over my microphone, and the tagline is, "Who the hell is Scotty Scheffler?"
Fantastic. Yeah, it's funny. I think Bob Barker probably, for a new generation, that's how they remembered him. Over Price is Right. The power of a popular movie, a cult flick like that, for sure. I want to go. You shared something with me that I didn't know until, again, that fateful conversation back in 2007 when you were inducted into the Hall of Fame. And you had already been on the job calling the SEC Game of the Week for about, at that point, 6-7 years. And I think I asked you, well, how did that come to fruition? And you told the story. It certainly was not something that, you were striving for. You already had an NFL gig. And as much as we love college football, there is a certain status that comes along with being an NFL announcer that people don't typically leave that for anything else. So share with the folks how you kind of on the awkward path to being the signature voice of SEC football for nearly 2 decades, and how you grew into that role as someone, again, that really had you didn't have deep ties to the SEC.
Well, I was doing the NFL at the time. This was in 1999. And I was the number 2 guy working with Dan Deerdorf. And believe me, life in the NFL is really nice. There are a lot of nonstop flights and fine hotels. And we live most of the year. I'm in Austin, Texas right now. We have a condo here. But in 10 days, we'll go back to our full-time home in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and we'll be back there till October. And so we're in Steamboat Springs, and we have a commuter flight to Denver, and then you get to go wherever you go. But so I'm very comfortable. And I got a call from Lance Barrow. I'm going to back up to, in the history of CBS Golf, since 1956, there have been 3 executive producers: Frank Shakinian, Lance Barrow, and now Sellers Shy IV. And Lance was at a meeting at Augusta, and he called me. I was doing the NFL with him, and he said, there are rumors about CBS hiring Dick Enberg, who was then, Hall of Famer at NBC. And I wanted to give you a heads up because it might affect you. And I thought, well, can't imagine it would affect me. Why would it? And then Pat Hayden, who later became a partner of mine, or was a former partner, Pat was doing NBC Notre Dame games with Dick. And I saw Pat, and he said, just want you to know he's really unhappy. He and Bob Costas were rivals at NBC. And Dick harbored some resentment about what he perceived to be favored son treatment of Bob Costas. So I got concerned enough about these rumors that I called Sean McManus, my boss, who, not so parenthetically, incidentally rather, was Jim McKay's son. And Jim McKay is the greatest storyteller we've ever had in this craft. But I called Sean, and I said, we were in the kitchen of our home in Colorado, and Nancy was in the kitchen doing something while I was on the phone with Sean McManus. And I said, I want to call you about these rumors I keep hearing about Dick Enberg. And Sean said what he should say as a boss, the appropriate thing, kind of like arm's length. And he said, I can't imagine, he's such a high-profile guy and such a high-salary guy. I don't think we could ever meet his salary demands. And then there's a pause. He said, now, in the unlikely event that we were to hire Dick Enberg, how would you feel about becoming the new voice of the SEC on CBS? And I said the appropriate things back to him because I didn't want to do it. But he said, oh, okay, I'll keep that in mind. Hung up the phone. I looked at Nancy and I said, honey, pack your bags for Tuscaloosa.
You knew.
That was my inauguration. The first game ever, I worked with Todd Blackledge for 6 years, and then Gary Danielson for 11. My first game ever was with Todd, and it was Florida at Tennessee, end of September afternoon, and Neyland Stadium, 107th, and I had never been to that facility. And Jesse Palmer, who is now ubiquitous, won The Bachelor, and he's doing all kinds of stuff on television. He was the quarterback at Florida. He threw a touchdown pass that was or was not complete with 10 seconds to go. And the line judge quickly signaled touchdown, and Florida won 2019, I think was the final. And we got off the air, and I looked at Todd, and I said, "Are they all like this?" And he said, "Enough of them." And they were. And it became the greatest assignment. I'd never been the lead guy on anything at all. I've always was a number two guy. And to work with Todd and then with Gary and a series of our first sideline reporter was Jill Arrington, who lives in California now. Then we had Tracy Wolfson, and then we had Allie LaForce. I mean, how blessed was I
strong
to work with those folks. And Allie is doing NBA now on TNT. We're still great friends. I heard from her last week. Her husband, Joe Smith, was a major league relief pitcher for 13 years. They have a small son, 2 years old, Jacob. Tracy, of course, has gone on with Nance and Romo, and she worked with Iron Eagle and Raftery and Gail Hill on the NBA. She lives with her husband, Dave, who's a Wall Street guy in Tenafly, New Jersey. And she is just the best. Well, and Allie, I mean, all of them. So I had two great guys sitting by my side, and then three really wonderful women working as sideline reporters. And I mean, it was just the greatest assignment a guy could ever ask for.
I think that's certainly the case now. People realize the prestige that comes with that package, and you're forever going to be synonymous with it. I'm just curious. I mean, you talk about a indoctrination, a baptism of fire by any measure, to get called right into a controversial call at the end of a rivalry. Back then, Florida and Tennessee were both near the top of their game, and as you mentioned, 107,000 fans. And you know, when we get the question from people from other parts of the country, which obviously I know you spent a great deal of time in Dallas, that's now part of the SEC, but back then wasn't necessarily. Is it, forget about the talent and the championships, because obviously, you know, you coincided with the eventual run where the SEC just was gobbling up national championships seemingly on a yearly basis. But even before then, would you tell people in the business or just common fans about, here's why SEC football is different? It all starts with the venue. It all starts with the environments. It all starts with the fans, because great players and coaches come and go, but that is unparalleled when it comes to SEC football.
I would agree. I mean, I was never, ever a Southern guy. It was the farthest thing. You know, I spent the first 12 years of my life, really, in Everett, Washington. My dad was a Lutheran minister, and he was ordained from the Lutheran School of Theology in Rock Island, Illinois. I was born in Minnesota, but lived there for 2 months. Anyway, my first real memories were from the Pacific Northwest, and then we moved to Austin when I was 12 years old. So I've always considered myself essentially a Texan who ultimately moved to Colorado. But the reason we have a place in Austin is I got my first job here a mere 61 years ago, and spent 3 years at the television station owned by President Johnson and his wife. And then through a series of good fortune, lucky moves, I got the job in Dallas. And the best thing that ever happened to me professionally was getting the Cowboy radio job. I mean, that just kind of led to everything else. But I had no interest really in the SEC. And then all of a sudden I was involved in it deeply. And I learned about the passion of people, not just Auburn and Alabama, but Georgia and indeed Tennessee, LSU, loudest stadium in captivity. And LSU, the folks at LSU used to hate it when we would select one of their games for a 3:30 time slot because we cut into their drinking time.
Oh yeah, they don't like that.
So true.
Yeah, but you know, those venues, and I love Georgia. Now if I'm my arms are placed behind my back and said, okay, here's the blindfold. Tell us before we leave, what's your favorite venue? I think it would be the University of Georgia. I love Athens as a college town. I'm a big fan of on-campus stadiums.
Yeah.
And Sanford Stadium sits right in a bowl. And I've gotten to know so many people at Georgia. But how lucky in my life have I been? I get to call Nick Saban not only a colleague, but a friend. And I know Kirby Smart quite well. And these are, you want the creme de la creme of college coaches. You could do worse than those two guys. And so the SEC will always be uppermost in my mind. By far the most significant assignment I ever got in all these years of doing this. And
that's an incredibly strong statement.
After 10 years, my boss, Sean McManus, we were at Augusta. And here we are living in Steamboat Springs. So here, honest to God, a typical week on Thursday, Steamboat to Denver, Denver to Atlanta, Atlanta to wherever. And Chris Fowler, who's a good friend, said the three most dreaded words in air travel are Atlanta, Delta, connection.
As a longtime Atlanta resident, I totally can commiserate with you and everybody else on that.
Yeah, but Sean asked me after 10 years, would your life be any easier if we gave you a corporate apartment in Atlanta? So for 7 years, Nancy and I would relocate, lock, stock, and barrel, and we stayed at the Post Alexander Apartments out on Buckhead, right across from Ritz-Carlton. And across.
No kidding. I did not know that.
Yeah. And we were in a different apartment every year, but we would move down in September and not come home until December. And we grew to love Atlanta. Wasn't too fond of the traffic.
Yeah, nobody is.
Yeah, no. But that's a MARTA, right? You could have ridden the MARTA to the Dome to call the championship game from that spot.
I don't know. If
I wouldn't recommend it.
MARTA. That would not be SMARTA.
Security, but yeah, that's a very nice place.
Yeah,
Verne, we have a lot of ties to South Carolina, big South Carolina audience. You called two of the most iconic moments in South Carolina athletics history recently: Madison Square Garden in 2017 when they beat Florida to go to the Final Four, and then the win over Alabama at Williams-Brice. What were your thoughts about the venue in Columbia and, that day at Madison Square Garden where I remember you famously opened the broadcast that says, "Welcome to the SEC on CBS."
Yeah, I did. It struck me. I mean, that was the last college basketball game I ever got to call. And I worked with Jim Spinarkle, who's a wonderful guy. I did 15 years with Raftery, but Raftery had gotten too big for his britches, and he got promoted. And so, but Jim Spinarkle is a wonderful guy. He's another Wall Street guy, lives in New Jersey, and Jimmy and I we had Florida, South Carolina, and it's just. I remember coming on the air and I said, I never thought I'd ever say these words again, but welcome to the SEC on CBS. And it seemed appropriate. And how blessed is a guy who loves the craft that he's involved in to get to call his final basketball game at Madison Square Garden. I mean, the stars were aligned. And so it was, and Jimmy's a great guy. Raft and I are still, Billy probably is the closest friend I've made in all the sports that I've done over the years. We still communicate every once in a while. He's one of my favorite characters in all of broadcasting. He has never, ever heard a last call, which he would honor. His tagline, when they put him in the ground, the stone is going to say, just one more.
One more.
And he's got that brevity too. He's succinct, like with his color analysis. I like that about him as well. I mean, it's just a couple of words, but they hit, So yeah, that was Raftery. You can't go wrong with him as college basketball goes.
I think Ian Eagle is one of my favorite guys too, and the combination of Ian in his first year of doing March with Bill and with Grant Hill, I think Ian was able to get Grant to come out of himself a little bit and loosen up. And Raftery doesn't need any loosening; he needs some hardening. But the combination of, I think Ian's nickname is Bird, right? Eagle, Bird. And I heard him say during maybe the semifinals, Raftery finally called him Ian. And Ian said on the air, he said, well, I must have grown in your eyes because now I'm no longer Bird, I'm Ian. But I thought the three of them were just outstanding. And Ian Eagle was one of the brightest, most descriptive guys I've ever met. And so that's a really good team.
And great chemistry, which you can't fake. It's got to be authentic. And of course you had it. I want to ask one more of the SEC on CBS question, and then I'll make a final pivot. You mentioned some of the coaches that obviously stand out. I mean, you covered the GOAT, Nick Saban, during so many great moments. That one obviously stands out for a number of reasons. And as I've said many times on this show, for those that have never met Nick, you might have this image of him being this, grouchy guy, but that if you meet with him on a professional basis, and you probably on a personal basis as well, he's actually funny. He's engaging. He's a delight to be around. I know that's hard for a lot of people to believe. But what about some players that stand out? I mean, we talked about some of the moments. Is there one or two players that were your favorite to cover in those 17 or so years?
And almost immediately the guy who comes right to the top is Tim Tebow. Mm-hmm. I first met when he was on a recruiting visit to Alabama. And I was introduced to him. We were at some outdoor restaurant in the fall, and he had visited Alabama, but he grew up not far from Florida, and he's a guy that is very devout, and his faith is very important to him, and he expresses that. I remember he had a sister who was a missionary in Bangladesh. And the first time I ever heard of Sling TV, Tim told me that his sister in Bangladesh was using this device so she could watch his football games. And I remember Gary Daniels and I got to know, I did 23 Tim Tebow games while he was in Florida.
Wow.
And he's about as competitive as any athlete, not the most gifted, unfortunately. And I'll tell you a little anecdote. We were watching video of him. He had a problem with his left foot and how he took a stance. And Gary spotted it in some 8th grade film of Tim, and the way he dropped the ball to throw it. But competitive, my Lord, I've never seen anything like the guy. and he would compete to, and he tried to make it in baseball, and he's the most competitive athlete I've ever known. Not the most gifted, but he's one of my all-time favorites. And I'm trying to think, gosh almighty, I got to know Reggie White when he played.
Oh gosh,
and a wonderful guy.
If people only knew how good he was, there's a
yeah.
whole generation of people that don't understand.
You're
that
right.
name gets lost in translation.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Anybody else come to mind?
I mean, you got to cover so many great quarterbacks is the position that first pops to mind. I mean, I mentioned the Manziel highlight. Obviously, off the field, he had his own issues, but on the field, electric.
Yeah, he really was.
You know.
And he was a shooting star, wasn't he? And
no question.
Yeah.
No question. I got to ask you about this. You mentioned this again, going back to some of our conversations in the past. There is another generation, as you spanned a few of them, that still remember you most for Bowling for Dollars. Now, I was just a kid when this show was on the air, but I know I have family that watched it, that swore by it. I know it was a phenomenon. Tell the folks how you wound up in that gauntlet.
I remember the show. Mike doesn't remember. I remember hearing the promos for Bowling for Dollars. Before the Flintstones or something.
And it was seen in, I know in Dallas it was called Bowling for Dollars. In Boston it was called Candle Pins for Cash. And
nice.
It was owned by a company called Classer Productions. Their other franchise was Romper Room.
I remember.
Some context.
Well, there you go.
I was working at Channel 8, WFAA in Dallas, and I got called in. And Newton Minow at the time, this was mid-'70s, Newton Minow was the FCC commissioner, and he would refer to this 6:30 to 7 time slot as a vast wasteland. And so people were franchising things to put 6:30 to 7. And I got called into my boss's office, and I was told, we've agreed to buy this program called Bowling for Dollars, and you're going to be the host. And I said, not on your life. I'm a sports anchor. I am not a game show host. And my boss said, you might want to read your contract. And so he said, we knew you were going to say that. So here's the phone number. He's expecting your call. And it was the name of Chick Hearn, who was the voice of the Los Angeles Lakers.
Sure.
And he was the host of Bowling for Dollars in Los Angeles. And they said, call him, ask him his advice. So I did. And Mr. Hearn, who had done, I think before he finished, he wound up doing 3,575 Laker broadcasts. But he hosted this show. It was on the independent station, Channel 5 in LA, 7 to 7. And he was very gracious. He took the call, and he explained the format. You tape 6 shows every Monday, so you could take a week off at the end of a month. And it's a half an hour, 6 guests. And I said, well, how does it do in the ratings? He said, oh, my God, we're an independent station. We kill Huntley Brinkley on NBC. And Walter Cronkite can't hold a candle to us. And he said, well, so, on and on. And then I got a little uppity. And I said, well, Mr. Hearn, you're the voice of the Los Angeles Lakers. I just started the Dallas Cowboys. How about your image? And he said, listen to me and listen to me closely. Do the show. Take the money they're going to pay you, put a pool in your backyard, and move on with your life.
Woo, sounds good. I love it.
So
I tell you what,
exactly that. And in the midst of this run, I got assigned to my first ever national football telecast at ABC. It was for a kid who grew up in Texas. It could not have been more perfect. It was Texas, University of Texas, at Texas A&M on Thanksgiving Friday in 1975. My partner was Frank Broyles, the head coach and athletic director at the University of Arkansas. So we did the telecast, and it went pretty well. And my best friend was my spotter. He's passed on now, but his name was Joe Cash. And so we were driving back to have a Friday night Thanksgiving dinner with our wives in Dallas. And Joe was driving, and I was all pumped up, and I'm going on. I mean, I was taking narcissism to a new level. Joe, can you imagine Portland, Oregon to Portland, Maine? They were all watching the game today, on and on and on and on. Yeah. So we pulled into a gas station in Fairfield, Texas. And these were the days when they still did full service. So Joe gets out to go in and use the facilities, and I'm sitting in the car, and the guy comes out, checks the tires, opens the hood, checks the radiator, lowers the hood, and now he starts to wipe the windshield. And I could tell there was a hint of recognition in his eyes. And I thought, well, he's going to say something nice about the telecast today. He probably was an Aggie, really enjoyed the A&M win. He kept rubbing the windshield, and I look at this, that old mustard yellow ABC jacket. I still had it on. Finally, he turned back and he said, Rudy, God Almighty, get out here. It's that Bowling for Dollars dude on the TV.
Bowling for dollars.
Of course, that would rank at the very top of the pyramid of your illustrious career, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You've mentioned a couple of things that I think can apply to anybody, not just in broadcasting, but in life. First off, there's never been a broadcaster, I don't care how good or how illustrious, that hasn't had a bad moment or two on air and hasn't had a setback in their career. And that applies to any vocation, any career. Were there ever any moments, either early on or even later on, where you said, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I don't know if I want to keep doing this anymore?
Yeah, there were. As I said, I started here. A legendary guy named Cactus Pryor, long gone now, but he hired me. My first job was as a summer replacement announcer in FM radio. And I was here in Austin for 3 years, and I thought I want to do something legitimate with my life. So I resigned. I took a job at San Antonio where I anchored the 6 and 10 news for 1 year at the NBC affiliate in San Antonio. And the market in San Antonio was not the most sophisticated in the world. And it was the head of, if it bleeds, it leads, that kind of stuff. And the ABC affiliate was number one in the market. And they were patrons of that art. So we tried to, and I grew disgusted with the quality of our newscast and realized that I missed sports broadcasting and the kind of freedom you had to be your own boss in a sense. So I applied for a job in Dallas, and I was turned down twice. And finally, I gave it a go, and I sucked it up. And the guy who beat me out the second time was a competitor of mine. His name was Dave Lane. And Dave was the sports anchor at KCN in Temple when I had been in Austin, and we knew each other quite well. He got the job as sports director at Channel 8 in Dallas. Big. It was a top 10 market even back then in 67. And he called me. We were friends, and he called me and he said, Jeannie and I are expecting our first child, and I am not going to be an absent parent. I don't want, so I'm going into sales. And he recommended me for the job. And so that's how I got the position. I succeeded Dave. And ultimately, he became so successful in sales that he became my boss. Wow. And we lost him at a very young age. He's 51. He had a brain tumor. But his graciousness in recommending me opened the whole world for me. And it was shortly after I got the job in Dallas that I was invited to go on a Cowboy charter to Washington, D.C. These were the days of the Redskins and the Cowboys, Landry and George Allen. And then I was asked en route, would you do the pregame and the postgame for a radio network? And I thought, sure. And the fellow who was the play-by-play announcer then is a guy named Bill Mercer, who was 98 years old and still living, widow, in retirement, but we're still close. And the Cowboy thing, I'm getting long-winded and can't remember how I started this.
Oh, that's great.
The end of the joke, but the Cowboy job led to everything else. And I mean, I did the pre and post game that whole year, and wound up on the Cowboy charter going to Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I was there for the Ice Bowl. But still one of the famous games ever. And I remember I was pre and post game, right? So I had nothing to do. I remember the wake up. We were at the Northland Hotel in Green Bay, and the Sunday morning, and on the Friday, I'd gone on the Cowboy charter as the radio host, and I had arranged with Chuck Lane, the PR director of the Packers, to do an interview with Vince Lombardi. And I had a photographer along, that was Jack Murray. And you can't imagine how simple things were back then. There was no mass media circus. It was Lombardi meeting with 8 members of the Dallas press on Friday afternoon. And I had arranged with Coach Lombardi to do an interview down in the field. So the meeting broke up, and Lombardi got up and excused himself. And I looked at the PR guy and said, Chuck, help me. My photographer's down there. We're expecting to do Lombardi, and you had told me it was set up. So he got Lombardi to come back in. Lombardi said, I don't do television without a coat and tie. And I said, Coach, if it'll make you feel better, I'll take my coat and tie off. And he reluctantly finally said, okay. So the two of us take the elevator down. We walk out, and Jack Murray was filmed, no videotape. And Jack Murray started the camera. The topic of our 5-minute conversation was the electric grid that had been placed under Lambeau so that the field would never freeze. That film aired that snippet on Saturday night in Dallas. Well, Sunday morning, I get a call, wake-up call. Good morning, Mr. Lundquist. It's 7:30 and 13 below zero. And it only got I remember walking in. Frank Gifford was doing one of the CBS. Joe Buck, Ray Scott, Frank Gifford, and I can't remember who the other one was. I go into the radio booth, the TV booth, and I saw Frank pour a cup of coffee. They had a heater with a coffee pot on, pour it, and then lift it up and turned it upside down, and the coffee had frozen. And,
That's
Did
cool.
you have the Hail Mary? Did you have the Hail Mary game with Staubach and Pearson against the Vikings? That would have been, what, 75?
Yeah.
Wow.
How amazing was that?
Yeah, it sure was.
That was the birth of the expression Hail Mary, correct?
Yes, it was. Yeah, we were in Minnesota, and Frank Gleber, the late Frank Gleber, who sadly he was one of the great broadcasters ever. And Frank is another who died young. He was 51 and died of a heart attack while jogging. And he was the sports director at KRLD Radio, who had the rights to the Cowboy broadcast, but he also did CBS. And so Frank flew in, and the deal was whenever he was available, he and I would split halves. So Frank flew in to Minneapolis. He won the toss. He said, I'll do the second half. So I did the first half play-by-play, and then I was color for the second half, and vice versa with Frank. And
like
then
a baseball game.
Yeah. And then with about 5 minutes to go, I got on the elevator, went down, walked in. Back then in Old Metropolitan Stadium, both teams stood on the same side of the field. And so I was in the middle waiting to do the post-game interview and standing, and then Drew Pearson made the Hail Mary catch. And the South stands got real angry, and some guy threw a pint of scotch and hit the back judge, Armin Terzian, in his head and dropped him.
Man.
And so now the crowd is really riled up. And when the game ended, the Cowboys won. And by the way, Drew Pearson did push off. He might admit it now. But anyway, Rayfield Wright was the All-Pro, Hall of Fame tackle, a big 6'7" guy from Fort Valley State. And he looked down at me, he said, little buddy, it's about to get angry here. So you call a big cat. And he put his parka over my head. And that's how we exited.
Oh, man.
What a
That's
story.
unbelievable. That's unbelievable. Verne, we could do this for hours. I don't want to keep you longer, even though every story is so engaging from beginning to end. Again, your career is beyond words. We talked about economy of words. It's beyond words in so many ways with what you were able to accomplish over so many decades. And I just hope, first off, I hope you get Happy Gilmore too. That would certainly be the right move if they're listening, Adam Sandler and company. But I hope that retirement treats you well the rest of the way, and hope you and your wife have so many great moments together without the grind of traveling from stadium and arena to stadium and arena and going through all those delays through Atlanta Hartsfield. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Can't thank you enough for the time. This was terrific, Verne.
Well, I enjoyed it very much. You guys have a great day.
Thank you much.
Thank you so much.
You got it. He is Verne Lundquist, one of one.